As we know, on 15th of September 2021, the world received a hard news regarding the security partnership involving three well-known states, which is United States of America, United Kingdom, and also Australia. The agreement has clarified its aim to maintain the regional security and stability in Asia-Pacific region. According to analysts, Aukus alliance is probably the most significant security arrangement between the three nations since World War II. Together with us today, two intelligible scholars which has wide knowledge regarding international relations, especially from Western and Eastern Bloc perspectives. Our first panelist is Dr. Casey Hammond, an international relations scholar from Michigan, United States. He was a PhD graduate in history from University of Pennsylvania, United States, and currently acting as an analyst for Southeast Asian affairs. Our second panelist for today is Dr. Vinsensio Dugis, a PhD graduate in International Relations and Affairs from Flinders University, Australia, and currently an active scholar from Chengchi University, Taiwan. Without further ado, we will continue with the question session for today's forum. We will start with you, Dr. Casey Hammond, from the perspective of West. Dr. Casey, we will start with the basic of introduction for Aukus. Doctor, can you explain to us, in terms of global political interest, why the United States of America and United Kingdom have increased their involvement in the Asia-Pacific region nowadays? The floor is yours.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for your kind introduction, and good morning to everyone, and thank you for the invitation to join you today. Yeah, Iskandar, addressing your question, what has motivated the United States, Australia, and the United Kingdom to form this tripartite pact to provide Australia with nuclear-powered submarines? I believe that it's motivated by the changing global situation, and perhaps the most notable change in that global situation, at least in that part of the world, is a more aggressive form of international activity on the part of China. Now, the United States, Australia, and the United Kingdom seem to be very reluctant to acknowledge explicitly or openly that they have been motivated to form this treaty due to what they perceive as aggression on the part of the People's Republic of China. They're portraying it in more neutral terms. But of course, I think that's not fooling anyone what it's really all about. One of the things we have to keep in mind, and I don't see very many people commenting upon this in the newspapers, but China has had a much more aggressive diplomacy in even the last 3 years in the South Pacific. There were a number of South Pacific island nations that had diplomatic relations with Taiwan, and it had those diplomatic relations with Taiwan for quite a few years. And I think between like 2017, 2018, 2019, China very aggressively moved into the South Pacific to persuade some of those nations to switch their diplomatic recognition away from Taiwan and towards China. And that would include the Marshall Islands, the Solomon Islands, Kiribati, Nauru, these small South Pacific nations. One of the things you have to keep in mind is if you look at a map of the South Pacific, simply look at the location of Australia, New Zealand, and the United States relative to each other. And what separates these three countries from each other are these South Pacific Island nations. So these South Pacific Island nations, as tiny as they are geostrategic, geopolitically very strategic locations. Whoever controls those islands would be in a position to present obstacles to the passage of ships between the US and New Zealand and Australia. Okay. And so it's very important that the South Pacific remain open to, for the sake of the United States, Australia, and New Zealand, that their communication with each other remain unobstructed. And I do believe that these nuclear powered submarines, which will be able to remain underwater for months at a time, even years at a time, without surfacing, that these will be helpful in helping the US and Australia and New Zealand to keep their channels of communication open without them having blocked by, say, if the Chinese were to build up a naval presence in the South Pacific, the way they're building up a naval presence in the South China Sea, they would be in a position to present obstacles to communication between the US, New Zealand, and Australia. And of course, as a final comment, one of the things that the US has that China doesn't have, it's an advantage of the United States, is its global system of treaties. And in order for China to become relatively more powerful on a global stage, the United States has to become relatively more weak on the global stage. And so anything China can do to fracture the US alliance system is something that benefits China. And I think if you look closely at what China has, how China has dealt with Australia and New Zealand in recent years, it's not difficult to interpret a Chinese attempt to drive a wedge between the US and its two South Pacific allies, Australia and New Zealand. And the US is trying to consolidate those long-standing relationships rather than see them fragmented in any way.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Casey, for your answer. Now we understand that basically the involvement of the United States and the United Kingdom are motivated due to the geopolitical location that is far between them, and also the diplomatic tactic that seems to favor China's friendly engagement for the past few years. Doctor, now we move to the eastern part from Dr. Vinsensio. Doctor, Aukus has created a negative perceptions from China, which clearly say this agreement would undermine regional peace and intensify the arms race. Are we expecting more retaliation and aggressiveness will be professed by China in Asia Pacific to mark their influence in the region, Doctor? The floor is yours, Doctor.
Okay, thank you very much, Iskandar. Again, thank you very much for friends in UniSZA, Dr. Yatno, and of course, happy to see Casey again through this. And again, thank you very much for all students. So Iskandar, before I go straight away to your questions, if I may follow a little bit the point that Casey has already mentioned. Of course, I agree with him, totally agree with him. But then we probably need to look back a little bit, because I believe that what has been done by the US, the UK, and Australia, not only responding to the recent cases that happens around Western Pacific, Southeast Asia, but also I see this as a long continuation of the I call it a political, military and political dominance or great power competition that has been going on between US and China in the last probably 15 years. So I see this as part of what we call the pivot to Asia by the United States, which has been done, I think, since President Obama, but hasn't really been successful. So what I see this as part of the continuous effort by the United States under President Biden to really come back again to Asia. And back to your question, Iskandar. So looking within that particular view, I don't see any sort of soon response or similar response by China. But because my reason would be that China has been very much, how do I say it? It has been developing a lot of connections with countries within Southeast Asia, Western Asia, with the BRI program. And it is still very early, I think, to see the quick response, especially from China. Although, of course, in terms of words, they have already openly criticized the establishment of Aukus. So the critical point, I think, is to see what is going on as when the AUKUS was initiated, the three governments said that they will determine within the first 18 months about how it's going on, how they will do the plan regarding the delivery of nuclear power submarines to Australia. So there has to be, we have to at least wait for a while to see what is actually will be done by the China in responding to AUKUS for a while. That is my response, Iskandar. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Dugis, for the answer. Now we know from the perspective of East, due to the active engagement of China with foreign entities nowadays, they've been more careful in their next step, and we need to wait more and see the further actions of them in case the necessity of aggressiveness will exist soon. Now we back to Dr. Casey from the Western perspective. Doctor, you've explained to us in the question before why United States and United Kingdom have increased their involvement due to the geopolitical interest, and also to prevent the recent development of China in this region keep happening. However, Doctor, we focus solely now to the scope of AUKUS. We would like to ask you, Doctor, what is the significance of AUKUS in towards the Western Bloc involvement, like Asia Pacific specifically, Doctor?
Right. Well, one of the things we have to keep in mind is that the United States and the United Kingdom and Australia, along with New Zealand and Canada, have a long history of sharing their intelligence as a group of five, which they call themselves the Five Eyes. And so, you know, it's relatively easy to move from that long history of trust and sharing from the Five Eyes to AUKUS because of the existing relationship between the UK, the US, and Australia. Now, why is it? Okay, Australia is part of Asia. It's at the edge of Asia, but it can be included as part of Asia. The US and the United Kingdom are far away. So what is their interest in this? I do think that part of the interest is in defending defending the open channels of not only between the US and Australia and New Zealand, but also to have an ability, if it's necessary, to defend open channels of communication in the South China Sea area. The tremendous economic growth that has occurred in the South China Sea area in the last 50 years has been facilitated by the openness that has been guaranteed by the United States. and that openness is in the interest of not only all the countries who border the South China Sea, but it's also in the interest of major trading nations like the United Kingdom and the United States, but also Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan. Um, and the United States and the United Kingdom um, the United States probably has the most effective Navy in the world, and the United Kingdom is up there. So their combined naval forces can be an effective measure for guaranteeing open channels through the South China Sea region to make sure that those remain open to everyone, and there's not one power that's in a position to block others from having their ships pass through there.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Casey, for the answer. As we know, I could summarize a little the explanation by Dr. Casey. The major interest that driven both United States of America and UK to interfere with the Asia Pacific region actively nowadays is regarding their trade route interest, Doctor, in the open channel nowadays. I do agree, because as we see, Asia Pacific Ocean, especially South China Sea, has been a really active trading route for ships, and it's been gaining lots of economic prospect there. That's the interest need to be secured by most of countries that have stakes on it. Now we're back to the Eastern perspective, Dr. Vinsensio. Doctor, some experts and even officials from North Korea stated that Aukus could intensify a more active armed races in future. With the current state, the question, Doctor, with the current state of Asia Pacific politically, could the arms race be a threat to Asian members' neutrality vibe?
That's very interesting question, actually. But as I said earlier, maybe it's still very difficult to precisely say about what is going on very soon. But let me answer your question by say this. The presence of UK, just to follow on the arguments that has been proposed by Casey, the presence of UK within the Aukus and Australia, of course, is very interesting if we see it. Let's say some people call it the Anglophone front. Anglophone front, meaning that, okay, as he said, they are very old friends, majority speaking in English, let's say that way, and share, of course, a lot of historical backgrounds and so on. But the interesting thing, of course, is that UK, okay, of course, located in Europe, Western Europe, and a lot of questions why UK is invited, of course, within this particular scheme of trilateral security cooperation. My interpretation is that, just to back to a previous argument, of course, Aukus at particular moment, I see it as a deterrent means by US against China. So the involvement of UK in the, let's say, Pacific region, Indo-Pacific region, is or the objective of that particular involvement, of course, to see or to make a deterrence against China, because that would signal, okay, that the European allies take China's active, let's say, military maneuver in the Indo-Pacific lately as seriously as do the US Indo-Pacific allies represented by Australia here in Indo-Pacific region. That's make, I think, the comments that we have seen from many countries like North Korea, for example, I think also from China, saying that this will influence the arms race development within the region. But my position is like this. As I said, I think it takes year before everything is materialized, right? Because this is an advanced, technological methods that they will work on. And I said, as I said earlier, they have promised to working together within 18 months from now on, before everything is materialized. So of course, there is worry around the region, especially of course within ASEAN countries. We have seen the split sort of positions regarding Aukus from within ASEAN. We have seen, for example, the Philippines has openly supported. Indonesia and Malaysia is, of course, very disappointed with the Aukus initiative, and we haven't seen the countries or open response from the let's say Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. But I predict that they will probably at the moment, because of their relationship with China, will stay calm, not respond openly. And as usual, of course, Singapore will always align with what has been doing by the United States. So, in short, I think we cannot see the quick response in terms of military, let's say, arms races within the region at the moment. I think, given also the fact that many countries, or most countries in the region, are still busy with handling the aftermath of COVID-19 pandemic. So again, we will see what is going on after this. And then a critical point, as I mentioned in my earlier response to your questions, the things that they will be doing under or within the currently and 18 months from now, as they promised together. That's my response, Iskandar.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Dugis, and also Dr. Casey for the second question session. I think the discussion by both of our panelists is getting hotter and also really good, because apparently both of you have been talking about the involvement of these big powers in Asia Pacific is to ensure their existence shall be well known. As I quoted from Dr. Dugis just now, European allies involved in this particular issue of Indo-Pacific to let the people acknowledge their existence in this particular crisis of Indo-Pacific. Now, Doctor, we will like to move to you back, Dr. Casey, in terms of West. Doctor, in your previous discussion, you have stated that the interest of trade route is the one that has driven UK and also United States involving actively in Asia Pacific. Doctor, in the perspective of regional cooperation in the Asia Pacific region, how can exactly Aukus create a new dimension of dominance and influence in the region exactly?
Right. All right, let me get to that in just a minute. I want to add to what Professor Dugis said just a moment ago. I largely agree with his comments. I think they were insightful, and I find them quite accurate. But in terms of the relationship between the US and the UK, like why is the UK involved here? It should be mentioned that US technology for nuclear powered submarines, the US until now has only ever shared that technology with one other nation, and that is the UK. Okay, so this is nothing new between the US and the UK. Rather, the US and the UK are now bringing Australia in as a junior partner, and they aren't. It's not expected that they will share the technology with Australia, but rather they will supply Australia with the submarines. Okay, so the idea that that Australia is going to acquire the technology to become a nuclear, a nation that has the capability of producing nuclear weapons, that's very, very far-fetched. I think it's highly unlikely. And I just want to say this about France. If we look at the Western Alliance, France was upset about this because France was going to provide Australia with conventional submarines. It should be pointed out, though, that France has a presence in the South Pacific. France has extensive possessions in French Polynesia and New Caledonia. France is a Pacific power, and France has a naval presence there already. And I do think that ultimately France will line up with the US, UK, and Australia. It's just that it has been offended by the way in which the US dealt with this particular treaty. It should be said, though, that I think before France could be brought in as a full partner with the US, the UK, and Australia, French foreign policy would have to be brought in line with US, UK, and Australian foreign policy. The US, the UK, and Australia right now, at this point in 2021, have a fair amount of solid agreement in terms of how they understand, how they interpret what China is doing in the region. France's interpretation is a bit different, and France tends to prioritize economic relations over political relations to a greater degree than the US, the UK, and Australia does. But I think eventually France will pull into line there. Now, Iskandar, your question there, how is this going to change? How will Aukus change the strategic balance in the region? Am I correct in understanding that?
Yes, doctor. How will it create the dimension of political perspective in Asia Pacific?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, because I do think that Aukus puts ASEAN as a regional multilateral body into a difficult position, because up until now, ASEAN as a multilateral unit, if I may call it that, I think has done a pretty good job of presenting a position of neutrality. And I do think that Aukus, I mean, we can see it already with the difference, the way the Philippines and Singapore responded to the responded to this new treaty is quite different from the way Malaysia and Indonesia responded to this new treaty. And we have to remember that Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Philippines are among the original members of ASEAN, which started out as a sort of anti-communist alliance in Southeast Asia. And I would hope that island Southeast Asia, as opposed to mainland Southeast Asia, I would hope that the Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia would be able to work out strong consensus on foreign policy as much as possible among them. I would hate to see Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia at odds with each other. And I hope that Aukus will not do that.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Casey, for your answer. It's really interesting because you emphasize about the success of ASEAN being the neutral body and also the neutral unit for this whole time. I do agree with you, Doctor. ASEAN has been seen as the median for most of things. We have unique kind of diversity in terms of ideology, and we easily form consensus in discussions that we make. To summarize it, you also touch about the idea of Australia just want to gain the information of technology is far-fetched from this issue. Actually, we do agree. I do agree with you, Doctor, because as been stated by Dr. Dugis as well, this issue shouldn't be seen as in the paper issue only. In the perspective of politics, it's really deep and also mean a lot in terms of dimension of changes. Now we know the significance of Aukus in terms of Western perspective and how it changed the dominance in this region of Asia Pacific. Dr. Dugis, in perspective of ease, we would like to ask you, Doctor, we acknowledge that the big powers involvement in Asia-Pacific has mainly focused on the economic prospect, Doctor. We know that the diplomacy of vaccine, the BRI has been stated by you before. Most of these prospects in ASEAN from big powers come from economic one. Therefore, with the existence of Aukus nowadays, will Aukus affect any bilateral or multilateral economic relations of countries in the Asia-Pacific region, especially ASEAN, Doctor?
Okay, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Iskandar. That's a very challenging question. But let me begin by saying that currently my understanding, especially Australia, trying hard to convince the, let's say, their partner, Australian partners in ASEAN, with Indonesia, in Malaysia, regarding the worriness that comes from or within ASEAN itself. My understanding is that senior military figures from Australia, working quietly to, let's say, inform to make the Indonesian side, the probably also Malaysian side, to not to worry about this. So my personal, of course, view is that I'm expecting the presence of Aukus doesn't really change a lot of things that has been going on, as Casey has already said, that has been done by ASEAN. Especially, we have to always putting or underlining the current situation. Every country is still very having difficulties to handle the impact of pandemic COVID-19 pandemic. So back to your question. I mean, with the current situation, as I mentioned earlier, I still believe that this is an early deterrence against China. So it is very unlikely to see that there will be sudden change in terms of the economic, let's say, relationship. And I have to point out also as well, of course, there are a lot of, let's say, I call it economic stakes that has to be considered by Southeast Asian countries or Asian countries in general, in looking at or in making quick decisions regarding the presence of Aukus. I believe every country within the region, especially within ASEAN, will see this sort of presence of Aukus carefully. And I also, as I said earlier, I also believe that, especially Australia, I think, because my understanding, many ASEAN countries, especially Indonesia and Malaysia, is very upset with the movement of Australia, especially my understanding because no prior knowledge about this initiative. If I may also add that my initial reaction was that when Aukus was announced, it is a kind of like I call it a U.S. answer to many questions after this country actually left Afghanistan in August, because after the U.S. left Afghanistan, I think many questions was raised up. The people start to questioning, where is actually U.S. go after Afghanistan? Will it, as promised by President Biden during the election, will concentrate more on looking at the, reunifying American society? And then some people, is the U.S. shirking from the word or something else? So yeah, it's kind of like that. So I still hold in my previous position. Time will tell. 1 year from now, probably, what is going on before many big decisions taken by countries in Southeast Asia. And I hope that, I call it the backdoor conversations between the, government officials and let's say those who are, making making a lot of efforts to calm the response from within the region will succeed. Therefore, there is no need to make a very big change regarding what has been done by countries within the region, especially in terms of the economic issues. Thank you, Iskandar.
Okay, thank you, Doctor, for your answer. It's really insightful and also interesting because when you said about your initial reactions, is you kind of surprised actually with the presence of Aukus because prior to it, most of countries didn't really get any initial information. I do agree with you, Doctor. It's been the answer of US foreign involvement after Afghanistan because we thought that the foreign involvement of US has stopped maybe for a while until the AUKUS has been announced. Just like you said, Doctor, maybe this is just an early deterrence of US towards China. However, you've predicted that there will be changes. That's I think all of the students in here could understand and also analyze the future prospects of what's going to happen in terms of policy for the next few years. Next, Doctor, we would like to move forward to the next question, I guess. Doctor Casey, we know that now Asia Pacific has been the spotlight in terms of global politics after Afghanistan, after maybe few other conflicts of global. Now it's the focus of it is Asia Pacific. Doctor, with the involvement of major powers like UK, European allies, and also even China themselves in Asia Pacific, how could we expect the whole dynamic of global political relation will divert towards focusing on Asia Pacific respectively, Doctor?
Yeah, no, Iskandar, that's a really good question. I've been thinking about this for some time, and thinking of the Cold War as an analogy. And everyone is reluctant to use the term Cold War to refer to the new climate of tension between the United States and China. And I don't want to use that term either. So when I raise the term Cold War, I'm raising it in a historical sense with a very specific meaning, referring to US-Soviet competition in the post-World War II era, in which Europe became the most tense part of the world between the two superpowers. It looked like the place where the superpowers were going to have a standoff. And of course, Berlin was at the epicenter of that. The situation in Europe has largely been resolved in the post-Cold War era. And if there's growing tension between great powers, and I'll just say that, a growing tension between China as a great power and the United States as a great power, I do think that Southeast Asia, ASEAN, is becoming a region that might be compared to Europe in the post-Cold War period. It's caught in the middle of this competition. And that's a very unfortunate position to be in. But I do think that, over the next generation, we will see Southeast Asia as ASEAN, the ASEAN nations, as one of the most strategically important areas in the world. And what happens there will have global implications. Will the status quo remain, or will China present an effective challenge to the status quo that will unbalance things from how they exist at present? And I think that's the question that's the big question, I think, of the next 20 years. And when we ask that question, what I would ask the international relations students at UniSZA to think about is, let's contextualize Aukus. There are some critics who are like Malaysia, Indonesia, are afraid that this is going to militarize the region. Well, let's put this into a larger context and look at what China has been doing for the last 10 years in the South China Sea, claiming sovereignty over the South China Sea, building artificial islands, and militarizing them. Okay, now is Aukus, is the Aukus Treaty causing a militarization within the ASEAN region? And how did Malaysia and Indonesia respond to China's militarization of the South China Sea? So I do think we have to look at China's militarization of the South China Sea. We have to take that into account when we look at the Aukus Treaty.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Casey, for the insightful sharing. I think I do agree with you also, Doctor. The global implications will happen, and the big question that we need to ask regarding the transition from global politics focus to Asia politic for the next 20 years is about the changes in terms of status quo. Why exactly the Asia Pacific has the significance and also importance to be the focus in this particular global politics manner nowadays. And when you talk about China's involvement in South China Sea, it could relate also with those Dr. Dugis' ideas about the early deterrence. Now we do understand that this is the initial steps about acknowledging each other's existence in Asia Pacific, especially for the big powers. Now, Dr. Dugis will come to you from the perspective of Eastern perspective. Doctor, previously, you've stated about the ASEAN being neutral, and also how exactly we maintain to have this kind of wait and see and take the Aukus carefully. However, Doctor, with the current situation, you also stated that some of countries in Aukus, some of countries in ASEAN do agree with Aukus, and some of it, like Malaysia, Indonesia, doesn't favor it. That's, Doctor, the big question, the kind of, I think, the hot one. We are expecting ASEAN to have different blocks of ideology of Aukus in this region.
Okay, that's that's very most challenging question, because some people say, well, AUKUS actually is like a new ordeal for ASEAN's unity. But I think, okay, apart from any criticisms regarding ASEAN, of course, I am quite sort of conservative bloc in looking at the role of ASEAN. We have to really look back the history of ASEAN. Okay, I said many criticism, but ASEAN has done a lot of things for the stability of the region. And apart from the challenge, actually, what I expect, and hopefully the current leaders of ASEAN see it that way. This is a kind of a new level of challenge for ASEAN to unify them, okay, to further unify them. And although up to now I haven't seen any sort of instruments that can be done or that can be used by ASEAN countries, especially, let's say, the countries like Indonesia and Malaysia. But my note on this is that I'm still hoping there will be some change on the part of, let's say, the Philippines, especially probably after the outcome of their coming election. I haven't seen a lot of things regarding the whether their open support from the Aukus something to do with their domestic elections or not. I haven't really seen that. That's one point. The other point, apart from the history, a long history of ASEAN, I think I call it the economic stakes of China with these countries has been higher and higher in the last, let's say, 5 or 10 years. So on the part of China, I think they will be very careful as well in responding to what has been done by the US, the UK, and Australia by the establishment of Aukus. As I said earlier in my early response, of course, the harsh comment has been heard from several countries, yeah, including, of course, from China. But again, they will very careful because their stakes are higher in terms of BRI program around the region. Yeah. And let's also consider other countries, of course, yeah, other countries. I mean, we haven't seen the response, for example, the Quad members, India, especially India and Japan, of course, because some people lately also raise up questions why Aukus, okay? Because and then, as I said, okay, it is an early deterrence inviting UK from the from Europe to to signal to the US, okay, we are care about this, and then this block from western part of the world then also comes here to raise about this. So yeah. Uh, I do believe that it is like I said earlier, a new ordeal for ASEAN's unity, but then a lot of things has to be done by ASEAN to hold their unity, and of course around ASEAN we have seen some actually call the initiative of or the establishment of AUKUS as a troublemaker for the unity of ASEAN. But let's hope that it will not sort of change much in terms of how ASEAN work together to keep or to maintain the stability. And I very much agree with Casey's earlier comment in the future, and not very long actually, Southeast Asia becomes the very center of the gravity, and every countries or big powers like China, like US, I believe, doesn't really want to see the instability occurs here because it will impact the rest of the world. That is my position. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dugis, for your answer. Now we know the stability of the region is the most important one that has been emphasized nowadays. Of course, just like you said, Doctor, the global politics dynamic is always changing, and ASEAN need to move as well in terms of their instruments to ensure that they always unite themselves in terms of ideology and consensus whenever the challenges comes. We do agree with you, Doctor. As you may see, Dr. Dugis and also Dr. Casey in the chat has been really active Q&A sessions, I think, from our participants. We will give them the opportunity. Now we're entering the Q&A session. If any one of you have any sort of questions for our panelists, such as maybe the assumptions, Doctor, regarding ASEAN is a new World War III and stuff. Maybe you could ask for the scholar's opinion now in the chat box and also verbal. Doctor, I'll start with Dr. Casey first, regarding the US and France, since you stated about France's involvement in Asia politics before this. Doctor, there's a question from Christian, Doctor, regarding France. With France's initial reaction, which is negative towards the Aukus, are we expecting the relations between United States, United Kingdom, and France may affect the Western powers and specifically NATO?
Ultimately, no. This is like a spat within the family. Where they get upset with each other, but ultimately they are members of the same family, and they will reconcile and recognize their dependence upon each other. I mean, the reconciliation is necessity. It's just that they have their pride, and they have to deal with it in a way that doesn't damage their national pride. But ultimately, they will be on the same side and resolve this.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Casey, for the answer.
Iskandar, now would you excuse me for just one moment? Maybe you can ask the next question to Dugis, and I'll be right back in just a minute, okay?
Yeah,
Sorry
sure.
about that.
Okay, sure, Doctor. Now we move to you, Dr. Dugis. Since you've answered about the India, I'm really interested when you said about the Quad, because I think you've seen the media. It's been really silent reaction from especially Japan and India, especially when they themselves have the domestic issue. Doctor, there's a question from one of the participants, which is Ishraf. The question: United States had gave a strong statement on India action on sharing submarine technology with others, and now the Aukus was seen as inconsistency of US foreign policy principle. Doctor, do US aware of this contradiction that they've made in their statement, and the pressure from media can really give an impact on US or not, Doctor, nowadays?
Okay. Okay. Wow, that's a very good question regarding India. Of course, as I said, some lately ask about why Aukus, while Quad is already there. One perspective, and for this actually, my position is still very hypothetical. I haven't really dig down the evidence yet, but my understanding is that I I don't see that the U.S. fully. This is my concept. Fully trust on India. Okay, that's why there is still some sort of. I agree probably with the Irish statement inconsistency. We can see it that way on the part of how U.S. See India, for example. But in other cases, I think I forgot the term. I think there are some also disputes regarding the vaccine development or production lately between India and between the US and India. Of course, we can see this as a kind of inconsistency. But as Casey mentioned earlier, this is talking about high technological issues, and of course, as Casey said, it's very rare one to be done with the other countries by US. It was only with the UK, if I'm not mistaken, 1958 something. Yeah, in 1958. And as Casey mentioned, the method that the US does with the UK would be different with Australia, let alone the countries outside the Anglophone front, I said. So they will keep this, and then I don't think that those kind of technology will be provided or shared by the US with other countries easily. But by the way, with this particular initiative, if I'm not mistaken, if the plan is succeed, that would mean that the Australia will become, if I'm not mistaken, the seventh nation in the world to have such nuclear powered submarines. And my understanding, the earlier ones are the US, UK, France, China, including India as well, and Russia. So yeah, that is my position on responding to Iris' question. Yeah, people can say this could be like an inconsistency on the part of US, but as I mentioned, this is about high technological hardwares, which is every country I think who owns it will very selective when they want to share that. That is my response. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Doctor, for the answer. I think it's really interesting because the contradiction has been answered in terms of their importance at that time, which is nowadays to ensure that the cooperation between US and Australia is strong to hold the influence in in the Asia Pacific region. Now we're back to Dr. Casey. Doctor, I would like to ask you regarding an interesting question here. I'll read about one question regarding US, China, and ASEAN. Doctor, you've been covering the Western perspective now. I would like to ask you, and I've been wondered for this from a long time, Doctor. We know that US and China has a direct rival between each other, but how about UK exactly, Doctor? I mean, they've just have the Brexit issue. Right now, they've been involving actively with Asia-Pacific region. What exactly their significance in Aukus, basically, Doctor, compared to US and Australia?
Right. Of course, the UK is not a Pacific nation the way Australia and the United States are. But I do think, as Pak Dukis pointed out, the U.S. very early on shared its technology for nuclear-powered submarines with the United Kingdom, and only with the United Kingdom. And so to provide Australia with nuclear-powered submarines, it would be impossible really for the United States to do this without the cooperation of the United Kingdom, because the United Kingdom is a U.S. partner in terms of this technology. And so the United Kingdom had to be brought in. Now, the United Kingdom does have a historic interest in the region. The United Kingdom, for a very long time, had a presence in what is today Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, Hong Kong. And the United Kingdom also, for about 200 years now, has been, before the Second World War, you could say that it was the United Kingdom that provided sort of freedom of navigation on the seas, and the United Kingdom has maintained a strong navy since the end of the war, as the United States then became the dominant Western power, replacing the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom still had global interests, and it still had a powerful navy. And the United Kingdom is you could say, in complete agreement with the United States in terms of the what would you say, like the interlocking interest between naval power that assures freedom of the seas and global trade, and keeping this open for the benefit of anyone who wants to participate. And so I do think that the United Kingdom does have something to contribute to freedom of the seas in Southeast Asia.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Casey, for the answer. I think it's a really good knowledge as well, Doctor. Now I know the importance of UK, especially in their technology and military capability, their history of engagement with Asia-Pacific region, especially in history like Malaysia, as you stated. The global trade also driven the most for the freedom of the sea channel. It's really I would say completing each other. These all factors completing each other to driven UK to involve in AUKUS. Now we back to Dr. Dugis. Doctor, we have a really wrong question regarding Quad here. Since I think most of the students here really interesting about the Quad. Doctor, the question is, AUKUS' main motivation was to counter China's aggressiveness and promote openness in the region, as like you stated just now, early deterrence towards China's action in South China Sea. Doctor, I would like to ask, from this kind of initiative, which of the Quad members between US, China, India, and Australia will be in jeopardy due to the AUKUS establishment? Since Quad main motivation was also to promote openness, but the Indo-Pacific region as a whole, to include it. Doctor, maybe your answer for it?
Okay. Let me back to my previous position, deterrence again, and then if I may also add to Casey's comment regarding UK. before I back to the main question. Of course, if you want to make a deterrence, then you have to invite the 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 partners that has the big contribution or potential big contribution. As Casey said already, of course, the historical presence of UK and also its military capability. And as I said earlier, to signifies to China that look, it is not only South Pacific, Pacific countries that concerns with your let's say military maneuver to China, but it's also our allies from the West. That's one point. But back to your question regarding Quad. My understanding that it will be like sort of additional view, but because see the history of Quad actually, if I'm not mistaken, is not comes from initially not comes from the US, but it came from Japan and responded by India and the US. And okay, don't forget also the tsunami in Aceh. Actually, it came from there. Okay, so the objective wasn't really targeting any particular state. It is an open, as Iskandar said, it's an open let's say collaboration. It's not very exclusive. And then, of course, if we are using Quad, for example, as a means to deter China, probably then Japan will say, okay, wait for a while, we have to really consider other things. Okay, so that is the reason, my understanding, why actually the US take another options and took Aukus. And one particular point probably we have to really also consider that from last year, I think, from early last year, we have to take note regarding the row between Australia and China, which I think is still going on until now. Therefore, we can see also this as a part of sort of means on the part of Australia to really, I call it, it's like a testament to Australia that they have their independence and leverage to respond to the situations that occur within the Pacific, Indo-Pacific region. In some part, I think this position or this view makes some countries like Indonesia and Malaysia really sort of not very happy with the initiative of Australia, which therefore now they have to really convince their friends in Indonesia and in Malaysia especially to say, okay, don't worry about this. We just want to respond to what is going on in Indo-Pacific region. That's my response, Iskandar. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Dugis, for the answer. It's really interesting to understand about the Quad and exactly why US formed Aukus without inviting all of the Quad members to join as well. Doctor, I have the beside question, I guess. Many want to know, but I will get to it after the question after this. Now, I would like to ask the question for both of you, Dr. Casey and Dr. Dugis, to answer, because I guess this question has been asked from so many people, especially the public figure and public people. Doctor, they said that US and also China has moved the ships, has moved the military capability, and we've seen the intents of it. Doctor, for both of you to answer, do we really gonna have Cold War 2.0? The question from Christian.
Are we really going to have?
Yes, Doctor.
Cold War 2.0. Cold War 2.0.
Oh, Cold War 2.0. Okay.
So, Casey, you go first.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, okay, and I'll tell you, before I get to that, I just want to add, I think Professor Dugis made some really good points, and he was uh, really smart to remind all of us that the Quad originated as a Japanese idea that had nothing to do with China. And if you look in late September, when there was the first leaders summit, where the leaders of the four Quad nations met at the White House, if you just go back to the newspapers from, I don't know, about 3 weeks ago, and you look at what they discussed, they weren't discussing China. A lot of the areas in which they've agreed to cooperate are not military at all, but rather in terms of cooperating in assuring global supply chains, cooperating in 5G deployment, cooperating in cybersecurity, cooperating with satellite data. So we have to let's keep that in mind, and make this distinction as Pact Dugis did. But I think we really have to continue to bear this in mind: a distinction between Aukus and the Quad, and how different they are. Now, is this going to be Cold War 2.0? You know, there's a lot of talk about that, and I hope that if we're going to use those terms, that we use those terms carefully, and that we define what we're talking about when we say that, because you know, some people say history repeats itself, but it doesn't really repeat itself. Sometimes similar situations will arise again in history, but they're only similar in sort of large ways. But what motivates them and what's actually taking place is something different. And so I want to avoid using the term Cold War, and I think it's probably better at this point to just talk about maybe a great power rivalry, rather than a Cold War, because when we say Cold War, it automatically, at least for people who are old enough to remember the Cold War, or those of you who are younger and who have studied the Cold War, I think it's wrong to bear in mind the sort of competition that took place between the United States and the Soviet Union, because during the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union were completely separate worlds. The Cold War was basically a military competition. It was not a technology competition. It was not an economic competition. It wasn't a cultural competition. To a certain extent, an ideological competition between, say, liberal capitalism and Marxism. There was a bit of an ideological competition, but it was largely a military competition between two powers that were nowhere near being equals in terms of technology or economics. The sort of competition that China presents to the United States is unprecedented in our lifetime, and so we have to look at this with fresh eyes and be very careful about what sort of competition we're talking about.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Casey.
Yeah.
Now, Dr. Dugis.
Yeah,
How about you?
Yeah, I agree with that logic, Casey. Apart from that, I think there are two, let's say, additional things that the current situation will not going to that particular way, Cold War, in the sense of the traditional notion. There are two things. One is the domestic support, right? I mean, meaning that, okay, the criticisms that comes from inside the countries, including in the U.S. Let's say when the United States under President Biden, for example, initiated, I think we also see some criticism that comes out from the inside the United States, meaning that, yeah, it's not like in the 1960s, 70s, where domestic public very silent and fully support the stance of the government. So there would be some criticisms, and my point is that it will goes around also in countries like Southeast Asia and in the part of the world. which we then say that the pluralistic view about the event is still going on. My second point is that, okay, don't forget the other aspects of interactions, civil societies and trade, of course. We say that, like Casey said, okay, they are, I mean, the US and China involved in a great power competition, of course, in probably in some military areas, but then doesn't really say that there is no commercial or trade relation between these countries. Yeah, there is still some significant things that has been done throughout the process or outside political spheres that has been going on. So yeah, with that, I think it is very unlikely to go that that direction, or to call it the Cold War or something. I mean, I don't see it that way too, as what Casey has already mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dugis, and also Dr. Casey for the insightful answer. I think we could agree with both of you, Doctor, because apparently the issue of rivalry is still new. And considering that the region of Asia Pacific is one of the stable one, due to the consensus being formed by ASEAN and also the cooperative unity manner, we could say that the possibility of a real war, or basically the Cold War terms, happening is very unlikely, considering how the issue still, I think, controllable nowadays in terms of diplomatic manner. Doctor, now we would like to move to the also interesting question, I guess, from the Facebook. Regarding the submarine technology, Dr. Casey, you've said about the France before. You've attached about exact France in terms of influence. They also have it in the Asia Pacific. However, Doctor, why exactly Australia choose to form Aukus and agrees with the technological capability development from UK and US, although technically they've been offered from France before for the nuclear deal, nuclear submarine deal? Maybe you have the answer for it.
Yeah, no, Iskandar, I'm not sure that France has offered nuclear powered submarines to Australia. They did have a contract with Australia for conventional submarines.
Conventional submarines.
Conventional submarines. Yeah. And there was some tension between Australia and France over this contract, especially in the last couple of years. They signed the contract, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, and as they got deeper into the contract, France was changing, some of the terms, some of the costs in a way that was upsetting Australia. So there was already a tension in that contract before Aukus was announced. And so France, so we have to remember that France was not offering nuclear powered submarines to Australia, but because of French possessions, though, in the Indian Ocean as well as in the South Pacific, France does have a naval presence in the region, and I'm sure that France will, before too long, be cooperating with Aukus, even if it doesn't become a full-fledged partner.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Casey, for the answer. Now we understand the pledge of commitment. Yeah, Doctor? Yeah,
Iskandar, do you mind? I saw a question come in about Indonesia, and I thought it was a good question. Ishraf Hassan sent this question, and I do think that Indonesia is affected by Aukus different ASEAN nations, and the reason why is because of Indonesia's size and because of its geographic location and something to do with Indonesian nationalism, that Indonesia, especially under Jokowi, these to be globally as a maritime nation. I think it's a matter of Indonesian pride that Indonesia within ASEAN, and so I do think that um, is probably being interpreted as a challenge in its maritime region. And so I do think that Aukus has a particularly delicate job ahead of itself in assuring Indonesia of its maritime sovereignty and taking into account Indonesian sensitivities.
Thank you, Dr. Casey. From the view, maybe Dr. Dugis, as an international Indonesian scholar, from the internal part, Doctor.
Yeah.
How?
We can see from the, let's say, early reactions from the Indonesian officers. Our foreign ministers, very short when she was asked about Indonesia's response in the initial stage, she said that we will see what will be happening, and then very soon, my understanding after that, as I mentioned earlier, some senior military officers from Australia went to Indonesia to discuss and to inform about this. And for me, this is an initial indications that, yeah, of course, Indonesia is very, very sensitive, let's say it that way, about the establishment of Aukus. Of course, as Casey said, okay, geographically, yeah, we are very large, of course, island nation. And then, of course, let's say if very soon, I don't know how long it takes for Australia to reach this capacity. My understanding, they will either station it in the north part of Australia, probably in the what is it, Northern Territory, or in Perth, Western Australia, which is of course, yeah, close to Indonesia. And then, yeah, by the geographical positions, Indonesia is always sort of pay attention to what happens in the part of Australia, and of course in the other way around. I mean, Australia also usually concerns what happens in Indonesia usually. So yeah, I believe that as I said earlier, Indonesia is very concerned. Then we will see very soon the outcome of the process of convincing Indonesia, I would say that way, by particularly Australia. And then the thing that makes Indonesia upset, of course, we still concentrate more on overcoming this economic burden because of this pandemic around Indonesia, and then comes this issue. It will really as I said, upset your focus, and then make your government to let them see other things that taken into consideration. So yeah, it will make higher concern for Indonesian government to see what they can deal with this issue. That is my comment, Iskandar. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Dugis, and also Dr. Casey, regarding Indonesian current stance and policy regarding Aukus, how the prospect and also the future that could be assumed. I guess it is true. The Aukus is geographically being counted carefully to ensure that the aim of military gain and also capability development shall be enlightened at the first place. Doctor, I think this question also being highlighted quite big, especially after Aukus being told by so many medias and being covered by so many big press. Doctor, both of you, Dr. Dugis and also Dr. Casey, from your perspective, there are split views on the Aukus cooperation. Also, Aukus itself is not fully formed. So should China be worried about the formation of Aukus, or it's not really a big deal for them and Aukus just being overhyped at the first place? Yeah, maybe Dr. Dugis first, then Dr. Casey.
Yeah, if I may start, because see, like I said, I still see this in a let's say, early deterrence. Of course, we have seen reactions from China openly, upset about this initiative. But then, personally, I don't see any sort of urgent need to make harsh response from the side of China at the moment. My earlier explanation is that they have to consider also the the stakes that they have invest around Indo-Pacific region, yeah, and don't forget actually that they have done a lot of things to indicate their presence, not only, for example, in Southeast Asia, but also in some part of the South Pacific, Central Pacific, as Casey has already mentioned. And I think, as Casey stated, in the last 4 or 5 years, if I'm not mistaken, I will check again. There are two countries that has already shifted their support from Taiwan to People's Republic of China, yeah, Kiribati and Solomon Island, yeah, openly. And then of course China is still trying to do more in the countries like Marshall Island and others within Central and South Pacific. That's my response. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dugis. Maybe Dr. Casey, your opinion regarding the Aukus? Should China worry or not?
I don't think China should be so worried about Aukus. China certainly doesn't like the idea of Aukus, but I don't see Aukus as necessarily threatening China. I think because actually the United States is the nuclear powered submarines that will be supplied to Australia will be probably built in the United States and then sent over to Australia. It's not like Australia is going to develop any new technology on its own or any new, like, what do you say, military manufacturing capability and so on. So those are probably going to be American built subs that are then just sent to Australia. Well, those same subs, if they were built in the United States, those nuclear powered subs could just go from America over to that part of the world. The only difference is that they'll be part of the Australian Navy now rather than the part of the US Navy. But those the same number of subs could be added to the region under the US Navy rather than under the Australian Navy. So I don't see that as making that big a difference, the fact that it's Australia. I think my guess is, I'll tell you this, like if I were in the Chinese Communist Party leadership, and if I were a nationalist in the mold of, and a rather assertive nationalist in the mold of Xi Jinping, I think what would upset me most about Aukus is that Xi Jinping's effort to drive a wedge between the United States and Australia has failed. And I think that's probably, if I were Xi Jinping, that would be my biggest frustration, to have focused so much on gaining leverage over Australia and trying to neutralize Australia and ultimately failing simply because they overplayed their hand, failing at that attempt. It'll be very hard to lure Australia back toward a more neutral position at this point.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Casey.
Yeah,
So,
Iskandar,
yeah, Doctor.
can I just add some point?
Yeah, sure,
We have been talking a lot of things dealing with the military issues, military sides of Aukus. One thing we also need to wait, I think, because when the three leaders actually say about the establishment of Aukus, they were also talking about the opening jobs and by this project, and then creating probably, as my understanding, there will be a kind of like production center will be held in the South Australia, the city of Adelaide, which I think we have to see probably, like I said, 18 months from now or 17 months from now on, see what the other things they will be doing in order to achieve this submarine powered submarine issue, because there would be some economic activities also involved in that particular process. I predict, as what they promise. I mean, the three leaders promise when they make the statement regarding the establishment of Aukus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dugis, for enlightening the other significance gain or goals from the Aukus itself, which is the work production and also other prospects relating to production development in Australia, especially. Doctor, I said before, I have an additional question regarding Quad, Doctor. It's I think most of the question that has been asked leading to this one question that I would like to ask you, Doctor. With the formation of Aukus, Doctor, did US undermines the capability of Quad nowadays in the Asia Pacific region? Maybe Dr. Casey and also Dr. Dugis. Dr. Dugis, you may share first.
Who is going first? Casey, you want to go first? Okay.
If you'd like me to.
Okay.
Yeah,
you go first. You go first.
Yeah. I don't think that Aukus undermines the Quad at all. As I pointed out earlier, the Quad is a very different sort of loose, collaborative group than Aukus. Aukus is very defined with a very particular purpose, and so we're comparing two very different things. I don't think it undermines the Quad at all. In fact, I think it probably complements the Quad.
Yeah.
Okay,
I agree with that. And of course, the purpose is different, and the initiator is different. And also, if we trust on what the leaders say, they actually, especially President Biden, I think he said that during the establishment statement, it is complement to what has been for some, not only Aukus but Five Eyes and other collaboration that have been done involving Australia, including of course ANZUS as well, old ANZUS. So it's kind of a complement, not really undermining the Quad. But then of course it is my particular position on this. Of course, with the establishment of Aukus, that means that the Quad has to really, probably go back to its let's say initial purposes, collaborating on issues that are, for example, for let's say they have been doing this initially from tsunami in Aceh and so on. So other things that really, it's open, not really intended for deterring particular states, which is of course different with Aukus, which particularly, of course, it wasn't said clearly, in the statement of establishment, but we all agree that it pointed out to the targeting countries, of course, deterring China. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dugis and also Dr. Casey for the answer regarding Quad and also significance of Aukus. Doctor, I guess the discussion is really intense. We get a lot of input, highly. Maybe I would like to conclude with one big question, Doctor, because since the program is done towards the public awareness, however, Doctor, we've seen that many public society nowadays didn't really understand the concept of international relation. They assume that Aukus will form a war with the military involvements, its major power dispute and stuff. Dr. Dugis and also Dr. Casey, maybe from your perspective and also your advice, can you share with us what are the tips or also the advice that you would like to give to the public, especially students, in analyzing this kind of matter, especially Aukus, Doctor? Maybe, yeah, either you, Dr. Dugis?
Yeah. Okay, I will start probably this time. Okay. Look, international relations, my general position, is not only nowadays, it's not only about the interaction between states. There are interactions that involve other non-state actors, civil society, corporations, a lot of other sides. So when we discuss, for example, this case, Aukus, bear in mind that there are always other sides of interactions that involve not only states but also non-state actors, which if we go back to the question whether this situation leads to the new rivalry, which like someone said, is it going to be a cold war? Of course, totally not, because the situation is very complex and there are a lot of stakes that needs to be considered by leaders and public support. It matters a lot in terms of whatever the support of the decisions made by any government. So yeah, we have to see it that way. So international relations, the practice of international relations is very broader, complex, and I believe that some sort of element of interdependence is still there. So yeah, that is my view on that particular issue. Thank you, Iskandar.
Okay, thank you, Doctor, for your advice and tips. Dr. Casey, maybe from you?
Yeah, so what is ultimately the significance of Aukus? Yeah, I think we have to wait and see. I don't think anyone should panic right away. Anyone should assume too much. I see it as basically a defense of the status quo. It's not really something new. It's just strengthening the status quo. Now, a strengthening of the status quo, however, could be threatening to China because China wants to see a loosening of the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
But China certainly must realize that what prompted the strengthening of the status quo, Aukus, was China's own aggressive behavior. It doesn't seem that the PRC leadership under Xi Jinping, taking direction from him, yet fully comprehends the effect that China's aggressive diplomacy or aggressive foreign behavior is how that's being perceived by the rest of the world. And I don't know what it will take for the PRC leadership to understand that its behavior has been these last couple of years self-defeating rather than self-enhancing. But certainly this is an example of that.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Casey and Dr. Dugis, for your last advice and tips. Members of the floor, all the audience for today, Aukus is a really significant political movement nowadays. In this year, I do acknowledge the fact that Aukus has been a really brought issues and hot news as well for all of us, especially international relations scholars, to understand and analyze. However, just like what has been advised by Dr. Dugis and also Dr. Casey, certain parts of international relations is complex, and it shouldn't be seen as something that really leads to some sort of aggressive solutions, right, doctor? Like war and stuff, because diplomatic manner nowadays works in a very complex manner to ensure the political interest shall be protected at all costs. I think this is a really insightful session from Dr. Dugis and Dr. Casey, sharing to us almost 2 hours now, thoroughly regarding the Aukus, what you need to know in terms of political aspects, what the answers for all the assumptions regarding the wars, how exactly we could see the involvement of each entity in the Aukus, and what could we expect in the future, especially in the ASEAN and also Asia Pacific region. Thank you very much, Dr. Dugis and also Dr. Casey, for the information. We hope from the IRIS, we hope that this kind of program and information inputs will help the public community, especially to understand how international relation principles and also analysis works in daily life, especially in global news like this. Thank you very much, Doctor.